Yo, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name's Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, out here in Budapest, Hungary right now, recording this video. Today is November 15th, 2023. It's about 4:36 p.m. I got a lot of work today, a lot of English classes to get to after this live stream. So I'm going to keep this one short and concise, but we're going to get to it. So shout out to everybody who's going to tune in now and jump into the chat. I got the chat box open to reply to any questions or comments, anything like that. And also, shout out to everybody who's watching it in the playback, leaving funny comments and everything like that. So let's get into it. We don't have a lot of time for today. So today we're going to talk about Joe Manganiello. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's a famous actor in the US, and he has an interesting genealogy that I came across in an article that we will read today. But I wanted to start this live stream off with one of my favorite memes. This is one of my favorite internet memes that I see on the internet. I first encountered this meme on 4chan, and I have to say the Amerimut meme always brings me joy, always makes me laugh because I just find so much humor in all the caricatures and funny situations that they stick the Amerimut in. It's so funny because I roast America all day. I got no love for my country, my home my homeland, if that makes sense. But I always find good American jokes that we're fat, we're lazy, we're stupid. We eat McDonald's all day. We worship the gun. Uh, we're all mixed up mutts. And yeah, so that's what the Amerimut meme is here. It's basically showing a person in a McDonald's shirt with a tattered American flag with smells coming off of him and flies all around him. And then in the box quote, he says, "Let me tell you about what parts of the world are white." And the funny thing, this joke is meant to laugh at white Americans who claim to be so white, Aryan, and pure. And literally, the most white Americans are mixed up of different Europeans who other Europeans say are not really white, or even worse, they're mixed up with black genes or Latin genes. Yes, it is inherently sort of a racist meme because they're saying that, white Americans are less pure, they're less great as the white Europeans, of course, because they are, mixed up with brown skinned people of the world, the darker skinned people of the world. But I just still find the meme so hilarious because there are some things that you just have to laugh at, how stupid they are. And I think there's an accompanying part of this meme. It's titled Le 41% or 49%, meaning that the Americans are only 49% white or something like that. I find the meme hilarious, even though it has racist origins. I primarily laugh at it because it's the white supremacists eating themselves online, attacking themselves, roasting each other online. So I find that hilarious. But I have to also say, I think the Amerimut meme is not something that we should actually like run from as Americans, honestly, because I think one of the most valuable things about America is its diversity. It is a place where we have so many people from across the world that come together that at least try to make a better society or at least a better life for themselves. The American dream is widespread. As an English teacher, I encounter people all day who ask me questions about America, my country, about the American dream, about the opportunities, about the education system. So we as Americans should not be somewhat ashamed about our country. I know our country was founded on slavery, genocide, oppression, and that sort of stuff. But so many people, like Black Americans specifically, have forged a way and forged a path and made a way for other people to be able to come to America, reap all of its benefits, make better lives for themselves and their children. So we do have some things as American to be proud of, but we have a whole lot to be ashamed of. We have a whole lot to be ashamed of. Bombing the Cambodians, dropping nukes on Japan, bombing Iraq back into the Stone Age, killing innocent Afghani civilians, drone strikes all across the world. We have a lot to be ashamed of as Americans. And we have a lot to be ashamed of when it comes to our founding and our history. We stole land. Well, not we, not people like me, not Black Americans, but others came to a whole new land and said, "Oh, there's nobody here despite the savages, despite the red people. Let's wipe them off." Oh, you know what we can do? We don't want to work, or we don't have the ability to work out in the field and actually create a nation from our bare hands. Let's kidnap people, men, women, and children from Africa and import them there, and then treat them like second-class citizens for generations. So yeah, there's a lot to be ashamed of as an American, but overall, I think the diversity of the people that come to America is actually a good thing, because it is the one place in the world, well, one of the few places in the world where a national identity is not tied to a racial or ethnic identity. There are Americans that look like me. There are Americans that look like you, despite whatever your background is. And I'm in Hungary right now, and despite if I learn Hungarian, get a Hungarian passport, hell, marry a Hungarian woman, and fully ingratiate myself to this culture, I will never be viewed as a full Hungarian, because most nations around the world view national identity in terms of ethnic and racial and linguistic lines. In America, it doesn't matter what language you speak, what your background is. You are an American if you were born there or if you have the passport, and that's it. That's how I view my Americanness. Though there are others, unfortunately, who primarily are on the right, who view that separately. But we're going to jump into Joe Manganiello. So Joe Manganiello is an actor who's somewhat famous. I haven't seen him in anything that I remember, but I'm just going to briefly go over his Wikipedia page. So Joe Manganiello is an American actor born in 1976. His professional film career began when he played Flash Thompson in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. His breakout role was as werewolf Alcide Hervo in 5 seasons of the HBO series True Blood. So he's a very famous actor. I heard of True Blood. I never watched the show. I'm not into stuff like that. Possibly I've seen him in other stuff, but yeah, he's a famous guy. So as your resident black scholar, as the definitive voice on what is black and what is not on YouTube, yes, I am claiming the title. I appreciate anybody who wants to crown me as such, but I know my God-given duty here. We are going to find out today if Joe Manganiello is black. On face value, he looks like, I don't know, Lebanese, Syrian, something like that. I don't know, but looks like a South Eastern European, you know what I mean? Like his family came from Spain or some part of Sicily or something like that. He looks like that. You get what I'm saying? On face value. On face value. But Joe Manganiello actually has two black American men who were his ancestors. That's what we're going to find out today in the article. I read it beforehand. I find it highly interesting. The short answer, if Joe Manganiello is black, from your resident black scholar, from the definitive voice on blackness, from the person who stamps every single black card that comes in and out of my office, Joe Manganiello does not pass the test. I'm sorry, Joe. You cannot come to the cookout. I'm sure your baked potato salad is great, but no, we don't need this at the barbecue. So no, Joe, you are not black. You're not black not because you look white. It's because, Joe, you were married to Sofia Vergara and you didn't get her pregnant. You probably blew her back out. But Joe, no black man, Joe, will lay up with Sofia Vergara and divorce after 7 years, or at least not put one in her. Joe, I'm sure you pulled the tracks. You had her hollering, poppy, poppy. But Joe, no black man ever, Joe, would ever let Sofia Vergara get away. So, Joe, that's why your black card did not get approved at the office. Better luck next time. I think Penelope Cruz is out on the market. You need to get another spicy Latina, Joe, and come back and holler at me in about 8 years. That's when your application will be reviewed again. So, yeah, Joe, you are not black because of that. But let's find out a lot about Joe's history. And this is an article from Rolling Stone that came out January 15th, 2023. Joe Manganiello on discovering he's part black and descended from slaves. True Blood and Magic Mike Star opens up about his groundbreaking Finding Your Roots episode, plus see exclusive clips of the big reveal. This was written by Marlo Stern, published on January 15th, 2023. Now, the episode is easy to find. It's on YouTube. I'm not going to play any parts of it, but you can see it right here, and all the links for all the articles I will read today are in the description. So yeah, watch that if you want to get more into the story, but we're going to be reading his interview because the words and language he uses in his interview is very interesting. And plus, more of his family lineage is very interesting. I just want to talk about the title right here. Joe Manganiello on discovering he's part black. He's also part other things as well, but in the article, they're going to emphasize his blackness, even though he probably has more other lineage, of course, looking at his phenotypes, than just black in him, right? Why is it that articles, whenever a white person finds out that they have a black abuela or a Negro abuelo or something like that, they always emphasize that? Why is that? It's because people understand inherently that black identity is something special. It's something precious. It ties you to a certain lineage of people that have gone through so much and that make you very unique in this world. To be able to survive and pass on your genes as a black person in a world that is very hostile to black life and expression, especially growing up in a white supremacist country like America, it's a very, very rare and valuable and special thing. This is why I say all black life is sacred. So I think the dominant society, deep down inside, knows this. They recognize this. And so whenever somebody finds out they're black, it's like finding out you're Jewish or something. You get invited into the club. You get all the special handshakes. You get to eat the real good food. Like if somebody finds out you speak Chinese at a Chinese restaurant, oh, they're not giving you sweet and sour chicken. They're giving you that stuff that they be eating in the back. You know, that good stuff. You know what I mean? So Joe Manganiello and other people love to emphasize their blackness, and the dominant society love to emphasize their blackness or any ties to blackness because they do recognize how special it is. Not because we are inherently special, but because of our history, our lineage, and what we went through that makes us special as people. So I'm going to jump into the article here. Here's another picture of Joe Manganiello looking less tan, but still on first glance appearance, he looks like, he looks like a cop. He looks like any cop. He looks like any CEO of any major company. Looks like the prosecutor at court who's going to try to make sure that you do the full 25. You know what I mean? He looks like a average CAC. Let's continue here. So, shocking family revelations are part and parcel of Finding Your Roots, the PBS genealogy show hosted by Harvard academic Henry Louis Gates. Using a mixture of historical research and DNA analysis, the docuseries has taught us that comedian Larry David not only descended from a slave-owning ancestor who fought for the Confederacy, but is also related to the politician he's so gamely portrayed on SNL, Bernie Sanders. Questlove's ancestors came to the U.S. as slaves on the Clotilda, the last known American slave ship, which operated a half century after the slave trade had supposedly been banned, while Bill Maher is cousins with Bill O'Reilly. Okay, that one tracks. Let's talk about this. Henry Louis Gates is a famous academic. He's been doing this show, tracing people's ancestry for years. Other famous celebrities have been on there. I think like Ben Affleck was on there, Matt Damon, Jennifer Aniston. Different people have gone on this show to find out. Nas was on there. I think Erica Badu. Other people have been on this show. And it's a very famous show when people are revealed their history because a lot of Americans really don't know their history. I think this is common across the world. But generally, people don't know much more than their grandfathers, if that your great grandfathers. If you do know more than that, then you're very lucky. Me and my family, we're somewhat lucky. I posted on my channel a few weeks ago. I think last week I posted the video Foundational Black American, and we're able to trace my family's history on my father's side in America of Black people all the way back to like the early 1800s, which is amazing. And it's very rare that people are able to do that. It's more rare for Black Americans to do it than white Americans, but it is still generally rare for people to know where they come from. So Henry Louis Gates has been putting in work for a long time. Larry David is a very funny comedian. He had that show Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's also a very famous Jewish comedian as well. So it's interesting to find out that his ancestors were slave-owning white supremacists who tried to overthrow the U.S. government. Questlove is a famous drum player for the rap band called The Roots. I think they played on Jimmy Kimmel in the background. And Bill Maher is a famous former left-wing comedian slash political commentator who has now gone fully alt-right. And Bill O'Reilly, of course, is the original Dr. Doom. Yes, he was originally a very sick and evil man who tried to overthrow the world. So the first two installments of Finding Your Roots' ninth season divulged that Edward Norton is a direct descendant of Pocahontas. Julia Roberts' real last name isn't Roberts, but Mitchell, and Claire Danes' ancestor was branded a witch and hung during the Salem witch trials. I wonder how her, Claire Danes' ancestor, if that's a woman, how did she pass down her genes? Did she have a child before she was killed? I want to know. But the most eye-opening chapter is set to air on February 9th and features the actor Joe Manganiello of True Blood and Magic Mike fame. All right. I haven't seen Magic Mike. I'm sure my wife has seen Magic Mike. If you're a man and seen Magic Mike, why don't you just come out the closet, man? Come out the closet. What is there to see in Magic Mike unless your girlfriend's forcing you to watch it? Not for me. So if I have a short list of all-time greatest hits, Joe Manganiello's paternal ancestry is on the list. Gates tells Rolling Stone. So let's find out. So during his episode, Manganiello, 46, discovered that his great grandmother, Terviz Rose Darakjian, who escaped the Armenian genocide after her husband and 7 of her 8 children were murdered in front of her by Turks, ended up in a refugee camp where she was impregnated by Karl Wilhelm Butinger, a German officer. Butinger then returned to his wife and 3 sons in Germany, one of whom became an SS officer for the Nazis. Even more surprising, however, was his father's side. Joe's DNA did not match anyone with the Manganiello name, and the man he thought was his grandfather, Emilio Manganiello, was in fact not. Very, very interesting story. It's crazy how people from all across the world, like an Armenian who is escaping genocide, a Russian, a German Nazi, Italians, Black Americans, we all get mixed up into one person. That's such a fascinating lineage to come from, honestly. And you notice the article didn't put Joe Manganiello's descended from Armenian genocide survivors, or Joe Manganiello's great-great-grandfather was a Nazi officer. They just put, oh, Joe Manganiello is part Black. Right, which is interesting in itself, but it goes to show once again that Blackness is used to get clicks, get likes, get attention, because people know how valuable it is, despite how the dominant society tries to portray us and make us feel like lesser or portray us as lesser. I'm going to continue. When Joe's father submitted to DNA testing, Gates' team determined that Joe's biological great grandparents were William Henry Cutler, who was Black, and Nellie Alton, who was white. They narrowed Joe's grandfather down to one of 3 Cutler sons, all of whom were light-skinned African American men. Joe's DNA revealed that he's 7% sub-Saharan African. Gates and Co. also learned that Joe's 5th great-grandfather was a man named Plato Turner. Records indicate Turner was born in Africa, brought to America in bondage as a child slave, became a free man, and was one of 5,000 Black men who fought for the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. There is a monument dedicated to him in Plymouth, Massachusetts. What a fascinating story. Absolutely fascinating, because it's very, very, very rare for somebody to have Black paternal lineage in the United States for white Americans, especially when it goes back hundreds of years. Because for most of American history, Black men and white women were absolutely not allowed to have marriages or any sort of sexual relations at all. So it's very, very rare for Joe to have this in his family lineage, which is very interesting. Now, after all that mixing and jumping around in the bed, he still comes out with only 7% sub-Saharan African genes, thus not qualifying him to come to the hip hop party that we're throwing this weekend. Sorry, Joe, we'll catch you on the the rock and roll fest that we're having next week. But Joe, once again, you are not Black, not because you're 7% African, but because you let Sofia Vergara get away without a baby bump in her hump. Come on, man. Come on, man. What was you doing, Joe? Joe, you can't be pull out Joe. You got to be pull out no. When Sophia was saying, oh, Poppy, you had to say, yeah. You had to lay it in her. That's what you had to do, Joe. But no, you failed the mission. You did not understand your assignment. Maybe she's too old. I forgot how old Sofia Vergara is. But who cares? Who cares? You should have been pounding it out. Pounding it out, Joe. Whatever. I'm going to continue here. So, yeah, very interesting that a Black man would go to fight for the American revolutionaries during 1776. Absolutely an amazing story. Let's continue here. According to Gates, the series has an ethics protocol when they encounter a non-paternity event, like Manganiello's. Gates will cast the guest, inform them of their findings. Gates will call the guest, inform them of their findings, and ask if they and their family are okay airing these family secrets. We give them the option of getting out the series if they want. Then nobody will know except me and a couple of producers. And there are a couple of people that have withdrawn over the years, Gates says. So that's a very good thing, I think. if somebody finds out, hey, your father is not really your father, or your grandfather was not really your real grandfather, or something like that, or there might have been incest in the family, who knows? I think it's good that they let the people know that, so they don't end up embarrassing themselves. Though I do have a few guesses on who might be people that drop out. But I think it might be a lot of white actors who find out, hey, you think that your family came here in 1922? Well, really, you got a slave owning great 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 grandfather. He was the most brutal slave owner in America. Okay, I think I'll drop out. I'll come back next time. All right, we'll see you next time, Jim Carrey. Something like that. Anyway. So, by Manganiello's estimation, it took around 10 months for Finding Your Roots to nail down his ancestry, though some of that may have owed to pandemic related interruptions. Gates and Manganiello are hosting a special screening of his episode in Los Angeles on January 15th of Finding Your Roots First. There is no such thing as racial purity, offers Gates. If you go far back, everyone was sleeping with everybody else. Yeah. Rolling Stone spoke with Manganiello about the revelations of his groundbreaking Finding Your Roots episode, and now he's taken the news, and how he's taken the news. So here's the first interview question. Going into Finding Your Roots, what were you expecting? I had known since I was a kid about the Armenian genocide survivor story, and that there was this German soldier who was my great grandfather. For the past 10 years, I'd been trying to get on a genealogy show to find out who that German was. I always got no. And about 2 years ago, we got a yes from Finding Your Roots because they felt that technology had gotten to the place where they might be able to make some headway. Very interesting that the Germans didn't want to help him. For the past 10 years, I've been trying to get on a genealogy show. I guess he was talking about a German genealogy show to find out, but maybe the Germans don't like to give up information about, Nazis going to foreign countries and, R-wording non-pure Aryan women, because I think that goes against the code. Now, hold on, wait, let me take a step back. His grandmother was born during the Armenian genocide, so that's around World War One. So if that's the case, his World War One. So if that's the case, his great German grandfather couldn't have been a Nazi. He might have still held racist views because back then it was normal for white men to hold anti-black views at the time. So maybe, but the Nazis weren't around. So the idea of racial purity and that sort of stuff didn't exist. I'm going to continue here. Let's go in here. So now I then got a phone call that they needed to speak to me, and that for only the second time in the show's history, they needed to give a subject the option of opting out on the episode. That happened. We went through with the episode, and once we filmed the episode, I had a lot of questions still. They directed me to a German historian in Europe, and I personally hired him to run down a bunch of questions that I had. Very interesting stuff here. Let me jump past this video. Don't want to get a copyright strike. So let's start with your maternal side and the story of your great grandmother, Terviz Rose Darakjian, surviving the Armenian genocide. Could you walk me through her ordeal? It's astonishing that she even survived. The odds of you being here are so low given what she went through. It's virtually impossible that I exist. In 1915, the Turks came into her village of Harput in Armenia. They killed her husband, shot her, and she had the presence of mind to lay on the ground and pretend she was dead, even though she wasn't. 7 gunshots then went off as they killed her children while she lay there. They left the 8th child, an infant, to starve in the crib. After they left her house, she got up off the ground, took a piece of clothing from each one of the children, put the infant on her back, and escaped the village. What an amazing, harrowing story. That's such a crazy story. And yeah, it is amazing that he even exists. And when I think about people's lineage, people's ancestors and stuff like that, like no matter what your background is, no matter if you're black or white or whatever, all of our ancestors went through some stuff because we live in a pretty easy time in history. We have electricity, we have running water. A lot of us do, not all of the world, but generally we have modern medicine that can help us live. But Our ancestors went through a lot of stuff, and it's a miracle that we're here. We're survivors. We're the descendants of survivors, especially if you're a Black American. But even for other people who go through stuff like this, like the people who went through the Armenian genocide, people that have survived wars, people that are living in treacherous and precarious situations. It's a very interesting thing that people have gone through. So I'm going to go here. There were death marches where, after killing all the men, they would chain the women and children together. They released Kurdish prisoners, gave them coats, horses, and weapons, and unleashed them on these Armenian women and children. She escaped past those death marches, got to the Euphrates River, and swam across it with a baby on her back. By the time she got to the other side of the river, the baby had drowned. Oh my God, what a tragedy. She lived in a cave, and then she was picked up by German officers and put into a camp. We don't know the nature of it, but she was impregnated by a German officer in that camp, who then went back to Germany and left her in that camp to fend for herself. And she gave birth to my grandmother, who was born in a camp. What a still amazing story. What a crazy, crazy story. A whole movie could be made about that. Gave birth to my grandmother, who was born in a camp. What a still amazing story. What a crazy, crazy story. A whole movie could be made about that. Joe Manganiello could play in the movie. And the way he looks now, it's so crazy. The way he looks now, he dyes his hair blonde. He could look like the German officer that's gonna, rape. Oh God, that's so dark. That's so dark. But he could play the German officer who gave birth to his grandmother. That's crazy. Anyway, let's continue reading here. And then you discovered that your great grandfather's name was Karl Wilhelm Buttinger, who, after impregnating Rose, returned to Germany to his wife and three children. And we learned that one of those children grew up to be a Nazi SS officer during World War II. There's this powerful moment in the episode where you discuss having family on both sides of a genocide, the perpetrators and the victims. The idea that, yes, the oldest son was in the SS, which is not just regular military, that means you're bought in. And the younger son was a Nazi soldier. Yeah, so the SS were like the elite Nazis. They believed in all that Nazi stuff. So it's not like he could say, "Oh, I was just following orders." No, that your great great grandfather was talking about, we need to purify the race, purify the world, Ubermensch, and all that stuff. So through my talks with the family, it turns out that the younger son was sent to a gulag, tortured for years, and returned speaking only Russian and didn't recognize children. What's interesting is I have a maternal and paternal grandfather who both fought during World War II for the United States. So once again, you have family members on opposite sides of a conflict. It's really wild. I'm an avid watcher of Finding Your Roots, and when you're an actor, they say when someone criticizes you, you really can't take that fully to heart. And when someone praises you, you can't take that fully to heart. You have to take the good with the bad. And there's some of that with history. I think there's a tendency to say, I'm so proud that my ancestors were on the right side of history. But that's not you. That's somebody else. My roommate in drama school is a very famous cantor at synagogue in San Francisco, and he's one of my favorite people in the world. It's not me. Interesting. Very interesting story. And I really, really like what Joe is saying. I'm going to give him his props here because a lot of white people, if they found out that their great great grandfather was a Nazi SS officer, they would not want to put that in an episode and have that be on national TV because there is still a lot of shame tied to that. But I respect that he was that honest about his background and his lineage, and he can recognize the wrongs that were committed in the past. A lot of white Americans have very, very, very uh, uh, large amounts of cognitive dissonance, or they can't reconcile the past, how it still affects now, how they still benefit from the tragedies that befell other people up till now, and yet and still they want to claim America as a great nation and that they're sinless and that everybody needs to forget about the past. But I think when we understand genealogy and people's backgrounds, we understand that the past literally lives in us. Everything that our ancestors went through and survived, that is passed down to us genetically. And it's also passed down to us emotionally and through the stories and the culture that we pass on to our children, right? And what was passed down to us as well. So I find it very, very refreshing to find a white man who looks like this say so many clairvoyant things when it comes to understanding his lineage and accepting that bad things happened from people that came before him, right? Uh, and that there is some responsibility. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe I'm being too hopeful, but maybe there is some responsibility for us who have inherited the world of our ancestors to actually try to make it better and rectify those wrongs from the past. I really just don't like the last part where he says, you know, my best friend is Jewish. My best friend is like a famous singer in the synagogue in San Francisco. I can't be racist. I hate when white people do that. You know what I mean? Because as you guys know, I can't be racist. My wife is white. Anyway, here's Joe Manganiello attends the 2022 Vanity Fair Oscar party on March 27th, 2022 in Beverly Hills, California. So let's move to your father's side. This isn't the episode, but Gates told me your father would get very dark in the summertime and people would make jokes about it, and that your grandfather was cold to your father. How did finding your roots fill in those gaps? Very interesting. Very interesting. If I remember right, well, we're going to find out here, but if I remember right, his great grandfather was actually a black man, but they might have thought it was a white man. So that means his great grandmother might have cheated with a black man back in like 1920s America, which was hella dangerous, hella risky. Boy, talk about dangerous sex. Yeah, they were doing some wild stuff back then. And so then maybe that's why his great grandfather or his grandfather was very cold to him. But I'm going to read into this. So people went to their grave with family secrets that finding your roots was able to basically exhume. It was a real shock to find out that your last name isn't really your last name, and that I was related to a zero, and I was related to 0% of the world's Manganiellos is wow. I can't imagine what it must be like for my father to find out that at age 72 and anything I feel some seems and anything I feel seems borderline inconsequential. Okay, I can't imagine what it must be like for my father to find that out at age 72, that his father wasn't really his father. Okay, that's what I'm getting now. Okay. I've never understood what ground zero was for me or who I am. If you put me in a lineup of Italian people, I don't really fit in. You can tell that I'm mixed with something else. Yeah, I guess. I mean, he looks kind of Italian, I guess, but maybe mixed with like Syrian or like Egyptian, something like that. Maybe. Definitely wouldn't guess black, right? But we all have some black in us, right? Because we all come from Africa. I'm going to continue. If you put me in a lineup of Italian people, I don't really fit in. You can tell that I'm mixed with something else. When I saw the picture of the German officer who's my great grandfather, I looked more like him than anyone else in my family. My father would get super dark in the summertime. People would always ask me, does your father look like Tom Selleck? And I'd say, no, honestly, in the summertime, my father looks more like O.J. Simpson. That's hilarious. That's kind of funny. Or even the late Franco Harris. I don't know any of these old actors. I only know OJ. It makes sense now that we know. Much of my father's identity was rooted in the fact that he was full blooded Italian, or FBI as they call it. And there's a strong sense of that identity growing up in the ethnic neighborhoods of Boston. Yeah, so Boston is a city that's known more for its Irish population, but I'm sure there's a lot of Italians there. And a lot of Italians, man, the Italians are so confused and so interesting. A lot of Italians have anti-black hatred within them because of what happened in the past. You know, basically the Moors and the Arabs came there to Italy and ransacked it, ran all over the place. This happened multiple times throughout history. They've had ancient beefs with like the Carthaginians and stuff like that. They're also more darker skinned, slightly darker skin, like tan Europeans, dark hair, dark eyes, not a lot of blonde hair, blue eyes like you see in Northern Europe. So they have an inferiority complex to other Europeans, and they have even more of an inferiority complex in America, which is why some of the most rabid anti-black racists in America have Italian ancestry, right? And that sort of stuff. So, you know, FBI being full blooded Italian is like their sort of defense mechanism to make up for the fact that they feel like lesser Europeans back home because Italy is one of the, you know, one of the poorer of the rich nations in Europe, like in Western Europe, they're like on the poorer end of this spectrum. They're not like Greek poor or they're not like Hungarian poor, but they're like, you know, they're not big baller shot callers. You know what I mean? Most of the wealth in Italy is like in northern Italy, and the rest of the country, like towards the south, like south of Rome, it's just like ghetto. You know what I mean? It's like North Africa. It's like you're back in Morocco or something. And yeah, they have they really don't like mixing with black people in general, at least the Italian Americans, because they want to preserve their FBI status, their full blooded Italian status. So let's go here. in the episode that your fifth great grandfather was a man named Plato Turner, who was born in Africa and brought to the US in bondage as a child slave, and then became a free man, was one of 5,000 black men who fought in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, and there's a monument to him in Plymouth. We also learned that your great grandparents were William Henry Cutler and Nellie Alton, an interracial couple who wed in 1887 in Rhode Island, which was quite ahead of their time. Very, very interesting because that is extremely rare for two black men to, basically have, white wives at that time, which is, not something that we should say, oh, that's amazing, clap for those brothers, like as if getting a white woman is like somehow a status symbol, but more it's amazing that they were able to survive the racial hostility and the violence that comes along with just loving who you want to love. Being black in this world and doing anything outside of the norm that the white supremacists set for you make you a target, makes you a target. It puts a bullseye on your back, is generally what I'm saying. So yeah, very interesting, very interesting. I didn't even know Rhode Island legalized miscegenation, as they call it, or interracial relationships. So let's go here. I'm descended from survivors, says Joe Manganiello. To raise a child in a camp that's blonde when no one Armenian is blonde without a father, and to come to the United States and raise that child under the scrutiny of other adults around, that's tough. To come from West Africa in chains on a ship and to come to the United States and earn your freedom, and also to not join the British Army because there was a lot of pro-British propaganda at the time. It's rare to think that you'd have freed slaves fighting for the colonies. And the other side of it is this: Plato is not his real name, clearly. That was a name that was given to him. And unfortunately, names like that were given to slaves in jest. It was done derogatorily, giving them names of Greek philosophers. So to have that happen and then fight for the revolution in non-segregated units, and then the next time a war was fought completely unsegregated was Korea. You fight for the freedom and the promise that all men are created equal, and then 100 years later there's the Civil War. To think of how backwards this whole thing went. Very, very, very powerful words he's using here. I really like his text. I don't care if people call me a coon for this, or if they think I'm just praising a white man for doing the bare minimum. I don't care. I'm just going to keep it real and say how it is. This man is cognizant of a lot of things that a lot of white Americans don't even think about. Don't even think about. A lot of white Americans don't even think about it, or they push it to the back of their minds and act like it doesn't exist. So he said he comes from survivors. Yes, his mother's side, or one of his maternal ancestors, came from the Armenian genocide, a horrible thing. And it's amazing that that lineage was able to be passed on to somebody who ended up in America, like totally far away across the world. And that's tough. To come from West Africa in chains on a ship and to come to the United States to earn your freedom. See, a lot of white Americans now, unfortunately now, think that slavery was a good thing. They think that taking black people from Africa and ripping them away from their culture, their language, their religion, their families, and selling them as slaves in the US was a good thing. A lot of white Americans think this. Please don't think I'm lying, because that's what they're trying to teach in Florida schools now. They're trying to teach kids in Florida schools slavery was like free college for black people. They learned valuable skills while being enslaved, unfortunately. And it's very, very refreshing to even hear the bare minimum, because this used to be the rhetoric from everybody in the US a few years ago. At least 10 years ago, all Americans could agree that slavery was bad. And now recently, people are coming out saying that slavery, actually had some benefits, and, it wasn't that bad. And, if you had slaves, you had to feed them and pay for their medical care and all that stuff. Slaves were expensive. All these crazy talking points, I don't get where they're coming from. Let's make it absolutely clear. 1, 2, 3. Slavery is bad. 1, 2, 3. Do not capture people and rip them from their nations and homelands. 1, 2, 3. It's not cool. There was no benefit from slavery. There was no benefit from slavery. Being in America is not in itself a benefit. Africa was doing just fine. Africa would be a better place without colonialism. 1, 2, 3. I hope everybody's making this absolutely clear. It is not okay for any group of people or any people to oppress another group of people, to slaughter them, to castrate them, to force them to work in bondage until the day they die. That is wrong. Okay? That should be absolutely clear. I don't get why we now have this America where people think it's okay to say slavery was not that bad. Anyway, I'm ranting. And to think to join the Brit and to think that his black ancestor didn't join the British Army, because at the time, when the U.S. War for Independence was happening, the Revolutionary War, as we call it in the U.S., basically, the British said any black men who come to fight for the loyalists, who come to fight for the King of England against these insurrectionists who were the American revolutionaries, we will give you freedom. Any black man who fights for the British crown will get freedom. And meanwhile, you had black men who were slaves. A lot of them ran away and joined the British Army. A lot of them. I want to say a good majority of black men that fought in the Revolutionary War were former slaves who ran away and then joined the cause to try to get their freedom, not because they loved the King of England, but just simply for their freedom. But around 5,000 of them fought for the Revolutionary War. I would presume a lot of them were free black men, and some of them also were slaves of white men who were forced to go and fight and that sort of stuff. Maybe some of them were promised their freedom as well. I'm not sure exactly on the history, but overall, it would have been, if I could go back in time, I definitely would have fought for the British, or I would have took my ass to Canada. I would have just ran to Canada somehow, some way. I like to imagine that's what I would do, but who knows what would have happened in those situations? I don't know. So, and also another thing that I find very fascinating from what he said here. He said Plato was not the real name of his slave ancestor. He had an ancestor whose name was. Of course, when the white supremacists captured us from Africa, they stripped us of our names. That's why I'm running around here with the last name Hill and the first name Simon, right? And that's why most people in my family names are like Frank, Sam, John, et cetera, right? But he said a very interesting thing that a lot of white people aren't even cognizant of. The taking of the name is very important, and a lot of the names that they gave us were derogatory. Plato, of course, is a very famous Greek philosopher, but when you capture somebody and then you say that they are less than human, they are animals and that sort of stuff, it becomes funny and cute to say, oh, I'm going to name you Socrates, or I'm going to name you Aristotle, or your name is Plato. A lot of black slaves in the day had names that were reminiscent of Roman and Greek gods. There's two ways of looking at that. There's Negrophilophobia, where they're idolizing black people and that sort of stuff, because deep down inside, I believe a lot of the white supremacists know that they come from us, that we're the original people, and that we had civilizations and knowledge way before they came on the scene and that sort of stuff. But a lot of the times, what they did was they treated us like animals, and just like how you would give your dog a name like, I don't know, Socrates or Aristotle, they did the same thing for their slaves. Oh, your name is Jupiter, your name is Mars, your name is now Mercury, that sort of stuff. Very, very interesting that he is cognizant of that it was derogatory to give him a name that was other than his own, especially that of a Greek scholar, right? And I think Plato was the one who said that some were born to be slaves. So there's like a double entendre there. Yeah, very interesting to see that he is cognizant of the racial animosity and discrimination that happened in the U.S. for many years. In the beginning of the U.S.'s history, the army regiments were unsegregated. Black men could fight with white men, pick up guns, and fight for their freedom together. That wouldn't happen until about 150 years later in the Korean War, where we were going to stomp out the freedom of other people across the world. Oh, then that's when we can come together and have black men and white men fighting together to help kill the Koreans so that they cannot have freedom on their own peninsula, right? Crazy, crazy things that he's absolutely aware of. But even though Joe is super woke, Joe, you are not black because you let this walk away, Joe. Joe, this is a black card revocation violation, sir. As the administrator of black cards throughout America, I have to tell you, Joe, you failed. You failed, Joe. You are this close. You are this close. We were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you, Joe. Unfortunately, you let that baddie with a fatty walk away, and now she's going to call someone else daddy, Joe. Joe, ashamed. Absolutely ashamed. Ashamed of you, Joe. Next time, come holla at me in 8 years. Anyway, had you done a 23andMe before, or was the revelation that you were 7% sub-Saharan African a new discovery? I did a 23andMe prior, and the trick of the 23andMe that I came up 20% Irish, I gave it to my mother, and her test came up 0% Irish. So figured it had to be from my father. And as far as the African goes, I'm Sicilian. So I chalked up whatever African I had to being Sicilian. That's pretty funny. Yeah, a lot of there's a joke in Europe. There's a joke in Europe. They say Africa begins where Barcelona starts. So yeah, basically, Sicily is super close to Africa. I mean, Tunisia is right there, Libya is right there. A lot of sub-Saharan Black African migrants are pulling up in Sicily, Lampedusa, southern Italy right now. You know, the migration crisis. God loves Black people. You know what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's very likely that a lot of Sicilians in Italy have some Black ancestry. So sub-Saharan African means that you're descended from slavery. Um, as it pertains, I just want to make sure I'm reading this. All right, as it pertains to the United States. Okay, yeah. All right. Descended from slavery. So sub-Saharan African means that basically you're descended from slavery as it pertains to the United States. Uh, and I didn't know that what it meant until I was on the show. He told me that 7% sub-Saharan African is more than just about anyone who checks the box Caucasian on the SATs. So yeah, he has more Black ancestry in him than most white Americans, which is very interesting because he does not look white. I mean, he does not look Black at all. He's fully white. He passes as fully white, in my opinion, right? So, yeah, let's continue here. So, how did the information land for your father and the rest of your family? I don't know. We're not. My father and I don't talk, so I can't speak to that. For me, it's fascinating to know what I want, to know what I am, to be able to explore Ground Zero. I love history and storytelling, and it's part of the reason why I picked up my profession. I'm grateful. The reveal on the episode took 7 hours, which is way longer than it usually takes. And my mother and her sister and my cousin all watched via Zoom as it was all revealed. And I know it was really emotional for them to hear all the stories and face the truth. Very, very interesting. So, shout out to this brother right here, Joe Manganiello. Joe, you're not Black. You're not Black for many reasons. We've already expressed them several times. But I just want to say I applaud you for doing the research on your family history. I think this is something everybody should do. You should know your genealogy, where you come from, and there has to be a reckoning, especially with white Americans, on their history. I think every white American should find out their genealogy so that they can understand the privileges that they were given, the wrongs that were committed by their ancestors, how we can rectify them, not to feel guilty about it, not to feel shame about it, not to hang your head down low, not to beat yourself up about it, but to actually reflect upon it and understand that we all have some things that we need to work on. Our ancestors were survivors, no matter where they came from. Everybody went through something, but we need to be able to build on what they didn't accomplish in their life, or the wrongs that they committed in their life need to be fixed. And we need to be recognize who we are, because we don't know where we're going unless we know where we came from and that sort of thing. So shout out to Joe for doing this. This was a very interesting live stream. I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say about this. I'll be doing another live stream tomorrow. Once again, thank you to everybody who's been out here supporting, watching, liking, sharing, subscribing, everything like that. We're staying on our grind, staying consistent and persistent. My name's Simon Hill.